Welcome to Reframed, the podcast about disability in media. In this series, we shine a light on how people with disability are represented on our screens. Why is this important? Because authentic representation matters. Media is powerful, and more often than not, they get it very, very wrong. My name is Jason Climo, and I'll be your host. Join me, my co-host, and a wonderful selection of guests as we review, analyse, and score disability representation in TV and film. Welcome back, everyone, to episode 3 of Reframed. Today, I have my lovely as ever co-host, Steph Dower. How are you doing, Steph?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. How are you going?
Really good, thank you. And I am sad to say that this is the last episode that I have you on for season 1. We will be introducing a new co-host at the end of this. Yeah, I know. But it's been so lovely having you and getting your insight into the industry and everything that you do. Obviously, you're kind of like my secret little insider, I feel, with your amazing experience working in the industry. What have you been up to on that note?
So I've just been working on my own slate of projects over the last few months, and I'm working on developing a feature film, which is called Seeing Scout. So we've had a little bit of buzz around that, which is really exciting. We're still in the writing stage of that, so pushing forward day by day, minute by minute, and a few other things that we're doing. I'm also working on a documentary series which is called Carry On, and it is a travel documentary series. Jason knows a little bit about this because he was perhaps chosen to be on the show.
Literally, I'm still waiting for my ticket to Europe. I'm like, when's this happening? Come on.
Well, when you talk to the COVID gods and tell them to go away already, then we can finally get back to making a travel show.
Yeah.
It was just very, very bad timing, unfortunately. Yeah.
We'll just do like virtual reality travel or something.
But yeah, I mean, like, I've seen they've got these like walkthroughs of like different cities around the world. So maybe we'll just sit you in front of a computer screen and we'll just watch your reaction going through these walkthroughs.
So not as exciting, but if it has to be.
Maybe it's going to be like slow TV. That's what it is now.
Yeah. Oh my God. Oh, that's a no from me, but anyway.
Sometimes.
So I'm excited to get stuck into today's episode. We've got 2 really cool pieces of media that we are analysing, kind of big budget things as well this time. So we've got Game of Thrones, which we'll be doing together, and then we've got a really cool special guest, which is Genevieve Clay-Smith, and we'll hear from her a bit later. And then last up, we've got the movie called Me Before You, which if you haven't seen it, you are going to hear all about it and all of our opinions because most of us think it's a bit shit. So I'm excited to get stuck into those.
There are some strong feelings about that film.
And I think Game of Thrones is an interesting one as well. So let's get stuck into that and let's take a quick look at a bit of the trailer for Game of Thrones as well and hear a bit about it.
Game of Thrones is the critically acclaimed and much hyped HBO series based on the books by George R.R. Martin. Set in the mythical land of Westeros, the series follows several powerful families as they fight for control and power over the 7 kingdoms. The series features an array of characters, including those with both congenital and acquired disabilities. Bran Stark, played by able-bodied actor Isaac Hempstead Wright, becomes a paraplegic in the first season, while the character of Tyrion Lannister lives with a form of dwarfism, just as the actor portraying him, Peter Dinklage, does. In Australia, you can currently stream all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones on Binge.
Perfect. So that's Game of Thrones. If you haven't watched it, where the hell have you been? Go watch it. And probably don't watch this anymore because we're going to have a lot of spoilers for it, including who ends up on the throne. Steph, did you want to tell us a bit about how you felt about the representation of people with disability in Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones is such an interesting one to talk about when it comes to like the portrayal of people with disabilities because I think it does a really good job, but then it also does a maybe not so great job. It's a bit all over the shop. Like, I mean, you've got obviously the first person that comes to mind for me is Peter Dinklage playing Tyrion Lannister. Yep. So Tyrion Lannister, short-statured person, but he's also like one of the biggest characters on the show. He's seen as like this, strong, independent. There are definitely some jokes made about him on the show, but it's kind of like reflective of what people experience in modern society as well. So it's kind of like almost holding a mirror up to the audience. I think like this is actually what happens to people a lot of the time, unfortunately. But then so I don't know, for me that was one of the best like portrayals of disability I've seen in a while. How do you feel about the show?
Well, and to have like in such a large, like it's a massive, massive deal, I think, for something like Game of Thrones to be inclusive. Like that, I was so excited. On the other hand, I think it's good also that they have a narrative around Bran, who obviously acquires disability. But what was disappointing with that is that they chose to continue with a non-disabled actor beyond that point. And I think if you've seen the show as well, like they obviously very deliberately kept all the Stark kids as the same actors, actresses throughout the whole series. And I think they did that with most characters where they could as well. But I think with Bran, probably they could have made the exception because like as a child he was non-disabled and then like myself acquired disability. And I think beyond that point, they could have definitely introduced a new actor that just looked enough like the child actor to sort of pull it off. And then you still have that genuine representation. So I don't know though, do you have different thoughts about that casting choice?
No, I agree. I mean, so his injury occurs, I think, at the end of season 1. And he starts off as a very young child. So, over the course of the 8 years on the series, he does change in appearance quite dramatically. So it wouldn't have been that shocking to recast in season 2 to someone who has lived experience of having a spinal cord injury or whatever. I think it definitely could have been done. I understand that would have been more effort on the parts of producers and would have complicated contracts potentially in that. So I do somewhat understand why they did what they did, but it also could have been done if they had just put that little bit of extra effort or thought into it. So
exactly, and I can't help but feel that like the actor that plays Bran now has like quite a good profile, and I can't help but think that like if they had actually cast a disabled actor in that role, they would now have a good profile as well. Like they'd be quite famous and they might actually be being put in more pictures and more films and more TV shows and then getting more and more inclusion. So for me, it just felt like...
And then more producers couldn't have used the excuse, oh, but I just can't find anyone. It's like, well, there's someone right there. You could just use them. Like, yeah.
Exactly. There were obviously a lot of good things, and I think we can't ignore the fact that two people with disability and two characters with disability become two of the most powerful people in Westeros at the end. How did you feel about that? Like seeing that in the real world, obviously people with disability just aren't getting those sorts of opportunities, I guess, in general. So seeing that, do you think that could have like a positive effect on how society views disability and people with disability, or do you think it's just is what it is in the show?
It's interesting. Like I remember when the finale was out, and there was obviously a lot of talk about, maybe the finale was disappointing or like the final season was a bit disappointing. I just wonder how much of that comes from, were people disappointed that the king in the end was this kid in a wheelchair? Like, did they... I mean, when I heard that was the ending, because I didn't watch it at the time, when I heard that was the ending, I was like, cool, that's like, I love that. That's
same.
You don't see that ever. But yeah, it's just interesting that it did get that backlash, unfortunately. But you know what? I mean, it also put the image out there. It made people, see that and see that people with disabilities, can be put into those positions and are capable of being, I mean, not that we have, middle-aged kings around anymore, but, people with disabilities can be in those powerful positions. So, yes, it did get some backlash from diehard fans and that, but it still put the image out there, and I like that image is out there in society now.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. And, we don't have dragons, but I think there is a bit of power in that, and we can't ignore that when we're analysing this and giving our score. One thing that I felt was really important as well was a moment with Oberyn, and he is reflecting on when he visited Tyrion when Tyrion was an infant. And people were calling Tyrion a monster and all that kind of stuff. And Oberyn literally just says, he's not a monster, he's just a baby. And I feel like it highlights that no matter kind of how terrible and all-consuming ableism can be at times, there are also always allies. And I will touch on this later as well with our special guest. But there are also always allies, and that the system can actually be changed if people are willing to learn. So Oberyn just understood, and he either learnt about disability in Westeros or just kind of understood innately in himself that it's just wrong to be ableist. And so that sort of, I think, was an encouraging moment as well, trying to draw a reflection between Westeros and the real world, is that people can learn and change and understand our perspectives of disability and our own views of ourselves and our own community. So were there any other kind of redeeming factors or anything else that really important that you wanted to say about Game of Thrones?
I mean, obviously, this is such a big cast of characters as well. It was great that, these moments of, profiling disability, it wasn't the main focus of the show. This was just one thread in a very big fabric of story. So, I did appreciate that they just fit into this world. They weren't the sole focus of the world. So
yeah, exactly.
It'd be great to have more representation like that across the board, I think.
And I think as well, if the spin-off is still happening, it'll be interesting to see how they represent, if they represent disability in the spin-off, because obviously these characters were written in by the author of the series, and so it'll be interesting to see when I don't think there's books for the spin-off, so it'll be interesting to see if that happens.
No.
Anyway, let's leave it there.
We'll see.
What was your score for Game of Thrones out of 5 on the inclusive disability representation scale? For those at home, if you don't know what that means, it's literally just a scale that we've made up. Don't try and Google it because you won't find it anywhere. It's basically just our thoughts, our feels about how inclusive the representation of people with disability is in a certain piece of media. So, Steph, out of 5?
I gave Game of Thrones a 3 out of 5.
Interesting. I gave it a 3.5, so not too far off.
Okay.
I think the main thing for
Not
me
too
really,
far, yeah.
and I think the main thing for me really was just that I hated that Bran was played by a non-disabled actor. So that was
that's it. And that's it. And again, going back to that whole, they still sort of perpetuated some of those, some of that stigma around disability. But perhaps tried to be educational with it at the same time. It was all a bit, so nice in the middle, kind of. A little bit better than worse, but yeah.
Not totally terrible, but not great. Perfect. So I think it's time to meet our special guest for today. Steph, did you want to give us a bit of background info on our guest?
Yeah, sure. So our special guest today is Genevieve Clay-Smith, who is a diversity and inclusion champion, a creative director, social entrepreneur, arts and cultural advocate. She recently received the Emerging Leader Award at the 2019 Telstra Business Women's Awards. And one of Genevieve's many notable roles has been as founder and director of Bus Stop Films, a not-for-profit organisation that uses filmmaking and the film industry to raise the profile of people living with disabilities and other marginalised groups, both in front of and behind the camera. So, wow, that was a lot of information there. Did I capture it all, Jen?
Oh, you did a great job, Steph. I feel very humbled.
And this is exactly why we've that's exactly why we've got you on, because you're an expert in the field. You're an amazing ally, and obviously, like, as a non-disabled person working in this field, helping to uplift disabled voices is so important, and it's very exciting to have you. So I think Steph did a pretty good job, but did you just want to tell us a bit about your career to date, introduce yourself to people, give yourself a bit of a plug?
Yeah. Sure.
Bit of self-promo.
Well, I will see how I go. Well, I started my journey in the film industry over 10 years ago. I was studying at university, and I got my first filmmaking gig working with Down Syndrome New South Wales. And I spent 18 months with people with trisomy 21 and their families. And through that time, I really realised how exclusive the film industry was and how difficult it is for people with disability to be involved, both in front of the camera and behind the scenes. And so I went on a bit of a journey to try and, break the film industry open. I made a short film with a man with trisomy 21, and we also had a crew of people with and without disability working on that film. And that film ended up winning Tropfest in 2009, and Gerard O'Dwyer, who was our lead actor with trisomy 21, he won Best Actor. And so we made that film inclusively, and after that, it was really evident to me that this type of inclusive filmmaking model needed to continue on. And so I co-founded Bus Stop Films. And 10 years later, we are running numerous filmmaking workshops for people with disability statewide in Australia and interstate now. And we've done some projects overseas, and we're also getting employment opportunities for people with disability in the film industry as well. So we create films inclusively, we provide education, and we also advocate for employment and provide employment pathways. So that's a bit of a summary. I'm very passionate about ensuring that we have authentic representation of disability on screen. I believe that storytelling is fundamental to progressing human rights, and we need to be able to partner with minority groups in order to ensure that authentic representation occurs so that we're not perpetuating stereotypes.
Could not have said it better myself, really.
Absolutely. I was just about to say, I could not have said that better. That's exactly why we're here as well.
So why is it so important to have this representation on screen and behind the screen?
Absolutely. Well, traditionally the film industry has been, it's been dominated by a certain group of people, and those people have had a specific lens through which they view minority groups through. So, when we talk specifically about disability, the lens through which they're viewing disability is tainted by their own internal ableism, unconscious ableism. And so what we end up seeing perpetuated on screen, because they don't have relationships with people with disability, and they certainly have not believed that it is possible to work with people with disability because of low expectations. So the entrenched stigma of low expectations that people have of people with disability in society that infiltrates the film industry as well. And so we see stereotyped versions of people with disability portrayed on our screens, and we also see actors without disability representing characters with disability. And the message in that is that, we have such low expectations of people with disability, we don't even think they can play themselves. Yeah. And so it just continues to perpetuate those stereotypes, those low expectations, and just all the, the derogatory ideas around disability that really stops people from getting equal opportunity. So what we need to do is ensure that we're actually bringing people with disability into every area of the filmmaking process, so they can influence the way that their lived experience is represented on screen, and so that we can have actually a more realistic understanding and diverse understanding of the experience of disability, because it's not just one cookie cutter experience. People with disability are individuals, and they all have individual experiences. And what we have seen traditionally is a tragedy kind of narrative, or a pity narrative, or an inspiration narrative. and that's just simply not the truth behind many people's experience who have disabilities. So we want to make sure that that we're having people with disability involved in every aspect, so that we're getting a more accurate representation.
Yeah, exactly. And just really quickly as well, like with that, I think a big important part is allyship and non-disabled people, helping to uplift disabled people to actually get into those roles and give them those opportunities. Can you just touch on quickly why you think that's so important as well?
Absolutely. I think allyship, specifically when it comes to disability, is everybody's business, because disability is a human condition. And in fact, it can, I could acquire a disability at any point in my life. I won't change my sexuality. I won't suddenly become a person from a different, cultural background. But disability is real. It can affect. It can. Disability is something that we may all experience in our lives, whether it's in our own personal world or in our family's world. And we need to make sure that we're creating a world that ensures that everybody can participate equally and everybody has an empowered view of disability, because it is part of the human condition. And so I feel like when it comes to allyship, people often think, oh, but I have nothing to do with disability. I don't understand, and so they feel removed from it. But actually, I just believe it's everybody's business to want to ensure that our world is accessible for everybody, because it is simply part of humanity.
Absolutely. And people with disability make up around 20% of the population, but that means non-disabled people make up around 80%. So we still need the majority, which is non-disabled people, to help uplift us, give us those opportunities to control our own narratives, and put us on the camera as well. Like, put us on a TV show, put us in a film, get that real representation that's genuine. So perfect. Well, thank you so much, Genevieve, for giving us that insight, letting us ask you so many questions about your viewpoints, your career, and who you're working with and what you do. It's amazing. Allyship is so important, and I think you're a great ally. Now, I think it's time to dive into our second piece of media for today, which is Me Before You. My personal opinion is it's total bin fire, but let's get straight into it.
Me Before You is a romantic drama film, adapted from a novel by Jojo Moyes. It follows 20-something Louisa Clark as she takes a job as caregiver for Will Trainer, a 35-year-old former thrill seeker now living with a spinal cord injury. As a romantic relationship builds between the two, Louisa is ultimately left heartbroken when Will reveals he will be committing assisted suicide, believing his life as a quadriplegic is not worth living. The role of Will is played by able-bodied actor Sam Claflin. Me Before You can now be streamed on Stan.
All right, so that's Me Before You. And Steph, what are your thoughts? I think I'm pretty biased. My experiences of being a person with spinal cord injury, quite similar, and I think this movie is trash. But Steph, anything else to offer?
Look, I mean, I don't think I think we all agree that it's a bit of a damaging movie, first and foremost, to show that a life living as someone who needs a wheelchair or as someone with a disability of any sort is not worth living. You'd rather die than live that life. I think that's pretty short-sighted, very small-minded, and clearly there wasn't a lot of deep, meaningful consultation or collaboration with people who actually live with a disability in their day-to-day lives. So, damaging movie. I remember going to see this in the cinema, and at the end, it was a pretty full cinema as well. And at the end, I'm sitting at the back, so everyone sort of has to walk past me to get out of the cinema. And I just feel like everyone is looking at me being like, oh, you poor thing. Oh, you must just want to die or something like that. And I just felt like saying to everyone, trust me, guys, I can actually be pretty good. I'm doing okay. It's fine. But yeah, just really, really unfortunate, I think.
Yeah. That's horrible as well. And that is exactly what this type of film creates, is those moments where non-disabled people will view that, or like even other disabled people view that, and then they see someone who's a wheelchair user and just think, oh, wow, that must be so terrible. Genevieve, thoughts?
I think this is a classic example of people without disability telling a story through a tragedy lens.
Yeah.
And having no true understanding of what the lived experience of somebody might be. But what these guys did was make it about disability being the reason why he wanted to die.
Exactly.
And it's such an insult to people with disability, living their lives, contributing meaningfully, enjoying life, but they demonize disability and make it the antagonist and make it something that he needs to ultimately die from, which is really problematic because, as you say, audiences go away with those internalized messages so that when they go out into the world interacting with people, they're holding on to that subconscious message thinking that people with disability are lesser, they're tragic, that, wow, it must be so bad to be a person with disability, which is just so far from the truth.
One thing that stuck out to me was that there were no other people with disability or characters with disability in the film. And so it was like there was this whole thing where, of course, Will would have felt isolated because, one, he was completely sheltered and forced basically to, well, not forced, but forced himself essentially to stay at home most of the time until his love interest comes in and they go out and do some things. But not meeting anyone else with disability, of course that's going to feel isolating. You're going to feel like the only disabled person in the whole wide world, and you're going to feel like you're so different to everyone, where it's like my thing and part of like my journey, I guess, is that connecting with the disabled community was so valuable because I learnt so much about myself through doing that. And I just feel like that was a missed opportunity. But then I also have to think about this whole film was based on a book. And like the biggest thing probably, well, not the biggest, but one of the big things for me is also that they chose a non-disabled person to play this role. So it's like someone who's like trying to represent like the trauma of this experience is like not even someone that has experienced it, which is pretty bullshit, if I may say so. I will just play a little bit devil's advocate, though. There were some small moments that I thought were positive, and you might want to disagree, I don't know, and you might want to add to. But I felt like there was a couple of moments, and specifically one where they were kind of educating Louisa, which is the love interest, about his injury and his spinal cord injury and his disability. And she was kind of like, with all this physio, he's obviously going to get better. And then the nurse or the physio, whoever it is like, well, no, this is more to do with like, you know, like general health and like bone density and circulation and stuff like that.
Maintaining things.
Yeah, which I think is really important because I think sometimes on social media we see people with spinal cord injuries like, you know, doing stuff at like rehab centres and they're like standing assisted. And then people are like, whoa, this is amazing, they're going to walk again. And it's like, that's not necessarily true. And so for me, as someone that's sort of acquired, and for me, as someone that's acquired a spinal cord injury, that's kind of an important narrative, I think, to represent. But that's probably one of the only good parts that I noticed. So
I will also say that I did like seeing a person in a wheelchair in a leading role.
Yeah.
And, you know, showing them in a romantic, intimate relationship, like,
that's true.
As much as it didn't end well, you know, it did give that representation that people with disabilities, you know, can be capable and can be seen as desirable and and all of that. So I think that's the part for me that I'm like, okay, there's something there. It just went down the wrong way.
So on that note, Genevieve, out of 5 on our inclusive disability representation scale, what did you score Me Before You?
-5.
Amazing. Steph?
Based on what I just said, I did give it a 1 out of 5.
Yeah. I was 1.5 out of 5, just for those like tiny little moments of, for me, those personal moments where it was kind of educational. And like you said, like having a person with disability as a lead character isn't that common, but it's still pretty shit, to sum it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like they took 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, literally.
This film is meant to be a classic romance. So when you look at the genre that the filmmakers are working in, usually in a classic romance, the two lovers don't actually make it in the end. They either both die, or someone goes away, or one person dies. And I think, why did the vehicle of their separation have to be disability? How much more interesting would it be if Louisa had died?
Exactly.
I think that I just think that there's just so many more interesting ways to tell this story, other than making it about a man with disability as a tragic victim of his circumstance, so tragic that he feels he needs to die. I just think that the overall message of the film is so damaging, and it's just so uninteresting how they tell the story that it would have really benefited from somebody with the lived experience injecting some life into this story, because it actually probably would have been a better story. It would have just been more interesting, more truthful, and more surprising. So, yeah, that's kind of my last little bit of rant.
Thank you. And look, I totally agree. And every sort of picture that has a character with disability could definitely benefit from, and not even just benefit, it just should be the standard. That is the bare minimum, at least having one person with that experience involved. So that's our thoughts, that's our rants and our scores. Thank you everyone for following along today, and thank you so much Genevieve and Steph for joining me, obviously. This was such an awesome conversation, and I'm so glad that we could have someone like yourself with your experience that you've got, Genevieve, coming on, teaching us a bit about allyship, and telling us your thoughts on the bin fire that is Me Before You. Everyone following along at home, if you have thoughts, which I'm sure you do, if you disagree, if you agree with us, if you want to give us your scores, all you have to do is jump on our social media pages. So if you just search Reframed Podcast, or you can email us at hello@reframed.com. We want to hear your thoughts. That's the whole point of this. This is why we're talking about these things, and scoring and analysing these pieces of media, is so that you guys can learn. You're our little reframers at home. We want you to learn. We want you to tell us your thoughts, and also teach your friends and family about representation and inclusion and why it's important. So next time, I'm really excited we're actually saying goodbye to Steph. So thank you, Steph, a very big sad moment saying goodbye, but we'll welcome you back again, I'm sure. I've got a new co-host next week, which is Robin Lambert, which is very exciting. And our special guest is Ming Lua, who will be sharing her experiences as someone with vision impairment. So I will see you all then. Thank you. Bye.